here's a question I often get. Where are you from? I say, I'm from Milwaukee. And they say, no, I mean, where are you from? Where are you from? And I say, I'm from Milwaukee. I know what they're saying. I know what they want to ask. They want to ask, what's your ethnicity? The other one I often get is, what are you mixed with? I say, I'm not mixed with anything. And they go, I mean, I just figured you were mixed with something. Looking the way I do and having the last name Cruz, it often throws people for a loop. I can't name one time when someone's walked up to me and said, Guam, right? You're from Guam. That's never happened, guaranteed. Identity is something I've had to intentionally define for myself. Ethnically, I'm Chamorro. My people are from Guam. Socially, I'm just a girl from the Midwest. And yet when I ask myself, do I belong here? Where feels like home? Who feels like home? That is when my story deepens. When I was 4, my mom gave me a choice. She said, do you want to play the piano or the violin? My best friend at the time, she was playing the piano. So by that criteria alone, I chose the piano. Little did I know that piano bench would be a place I always felt like I belonged. From a very young age, I used to line up my stuffed animals, and I used to play recitals for them because I love to perform. I love standing in front of a room full of people knowing anything could happen. I could bomb up here, or I could experience the exhilaration of flow, or what the author Julia Cameron refers to as spiritual electricity. Playing the piano, it opened the door for me so that I could feel that. My family moved from Milwaukee to Elm Grove, Wisconsin when I was 8, a predominantly white suburb. During these years of childhood, I saw very few faces of color, except for my family. In this suburb, the standard of beauty, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a slender frame. I was none of those things. And so during the most important years when a child is trying to develop their self-esteem, I often wished that I was someone else. That 8-year-old girl, she still lives within me. I've had to find her. I've had to reparent her. I've had to heal her pain. I have had to lead her away from that place of inadequacy. My family chose not to teach me Chamorro, our native language. They wanted me to live and to learn in the language of the people I was surrounded by. My mom, she never sent Chamorro food in my lunchbox. And when friends would come over, she would always cook food that any American kid could identify. I don't begrudge them for these choices because I know that they came from a place of love. When I left Milwaukee, the universe thrust me into environments that were stark contrast to my upbringing in the suburbs. For my undergrad, I moved to South Bend, Indiana. I majored in music. I was the only American in a piano studio full of Russians and Eastern European Georgians and Japanese. They were so good, they were better prepared, they were better well-trained, they were awesome. And I often felt inferior among these elite pianists. It took me a long time to understand that my teacher recognized my potential well before I did. For my master's degree, I moved to New York City. New York is a place where you can hear dozens of languages in one day, where there's no one standard of beauty because so many cultures call this place home. Listen, during those years, I was dealing with a host of unresolved issues. And yet New York was the first place I ever dared to dream that I too was beautiful. After a stop in Cincinnati to complete my doctoral studies, I got a job at a historically Black university. It is my first and only academic job. It has been an amazing career. It has been hard. It has been gratifying. I've given my blood to the place. And this I know. At my current institution, I am home. And I do belong. It has taken me decades to tackle the question of belonging. I grew up understanding that I didn't belong to the communities I lived in. I wasn't blonde, I wasn't Russian, Georgian, Japanese, and I'm not Black. And yet, I've come to understand that belonging is the act of self-acceptance. It has nothing to do with the person standing next to you. And it has everything to do with loving who you are. My story is unique because I'm the only one who lived it. Right? And yet, the story of immigrants. It's the story of people of color. It's the story of women. Women commonly feel the shame of not belonging. In 2020, we are still told that in some spaces, we don't belong in the world of leadership. We experience the double bind where if we're assertive, we're perceived as aggressive. If we're passionate, we're perceived as emotional. And God help us, if we come to voice and speak our truth into a room, we are perceived as loud, brash, and shrill. Have you heard that before? A woman being called shrill? I am so deeply indebted to the brave sisters who came before me, because women could not walk the world the way we do if not for the legacy from which we came. They sacrificed, they endured so that we could awake from our slumber, so that we could choose to no longer feel the shame of not belonging. I'm deeply indebted to many women, to women of color, to female musicians who came before me. Margaret Bonds was one of those women. She was a Black composer living in a time where the world pushed her to the edge and said, "Margaret, you don't belong." Margaret didn't belong when she attended Northwestern University in the 1930s to study composition, at a time when Black people couldn't swim in the university's pool, at a time when she couldn't break bread with her white classmates at certain restaurants. Margaret didn't belong when she opened her own arts academy for Chicago's talented Black and brown children, or in the 1940s when, upon getting married, she kept her maiden name. Margaret didn't belong when she was ostracized by her white male counterparts composing at the same time, and yet she found her way through these obstacles. She said, "If you are not going to let me teach classical music in the halls of academia, I'm going to forge a fringe career. I'm going to write jazz. I'm going to write popular and classical music." She enjoyed a decades-long professional friendship with the Black poet Langston Hughes that yielded brilliant artistic collaborations. By refusing to let racism and sexism dictate her life and happiness, she paved the way for me. No, Margaret didn't belong in the 1930s and the 1940s, yet she found her way home. She found self-acceptance. When Margaret sat down to compose, the music filtered through her body, it filtered through her life experience, it filtered through her story before those notes even reached the page. I'd like to play for you now, Troubled Water, a piano arrangement of the spiritual Wade in the Water, and one of my favorites by her. When I sit down to play, the music filters through my body, through my life experience, through my story, before it even reaches your ears. Thank you for listening to my story in words. Now, let me play you my story. you.